For those of you who don't know, my name is Joe Sackman, and I am with Long Island activist and an executive committee member of New York Progressive Action Network and Our Revolution. And I would like to welcome everyone to the Criminal Justice Reform False Narratives versus Truth Town Hall. And first, I'd like to briefly tell you about the organizations that are hosting tonight's event: New York Progressive Action Network and Our Revolution. Both organizations evolved from efforts to elect Bernie Sanders to the presidency last year. NYPAN-Our Revolution officially joined forces to fight for the progressive changes we need here in New York. Bernie Sanders made his campaign about not me, us. The ideal is at the foundation of both of our organizations. And with the combined experience and political power of dozens of chapters statewide, we are joined in the fight to elect progressive candidates and advocate for progressive issues like universal health care, especially the New York Health Act here in New York, a Green New Deal, and legislation that puts people over profits, legislation and policy that works toward a more just and equitable society. And tonight we ask that you hold your questions to the end of the presentation, when there will be an opportunity for Q&A, and that you keep the chat cordial, friendly, and respectful. And now I'm gonna hand it over to my co-host, Sharon Golden from Together We Will.
Hi, my name is Sharon Golden. I am administrator of Together We Will Long Island, along with Joe Horowitz and Carly Paris, who are both on with us. I'm so happy everyone is here. So just a statement about who we are at Together We Will Long Island. We're an inclusive network of American activists united in our commitment to secure equity and social justice. Through action, education, and advocacy, we will refute harmful and intolerant policies that do not respect the dignity of all Americans. Basically, we fight for equality in every area that any injustice shows up. We want to thank our co-hosts, and I will name them. And gratefully, we are being co-sponsored this evening by Suffolk Progressives, Long Island Inclusive Community Against Hate, Long Island Network for Change, Suffolk County DSA, LVLZ, Nassau DSA, Show Up Long Island, Pantsuit Nation Long Island, Get to Work Long Island, and East End Action Network. We are lucky tonight to have two presenters. Susan Gottehrer and Elmer Flores will be presenting tonight. So welcome everybody. Thank you. You guys are on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Susan Gottehrer. I'm the director of the Nassau County New York Civil Liberties Union. I will turn it over to Elmer to introduce himself.
You're on mute, Elmer.
I think he needs to be a co-host to unmute himself.
Yeah, sorry. I can't unmute myself because I'm not listed as a co-host. But hi, folks. My name is Elmer Flores. I use he, him pronouns. I'm with RAP, which is Release Aging People in Prison campaign. And, you know, we're excited to talk about these slew of bills that we're advocating for on Long Island and across New York State. So I guess we could jump right into it if there's nothing withstanding, right, Susan?
Yeah. So I'm going to share a slide in a second, but let me give you an overview of what we're going to do tonight. You know, we have found that we go into spaces and we present a number of bills, and each, as you know, advocates are piece by piece dismantling the criminal justice system the way it is, because as we all know, there are major systemic problems with the criminal justice system. And so you'll be presented with this bill and that bill and all these little bills that chip away at this. But we thought it might be helpful before we present the bills we're going to present tonight to give you an overview of the criminal justice system, so that when people come in front of you and present these things to you, you can actually sort of place them in what I call the chain of custody. as the criminal justice system progresses, or as a body progresses through the criminal justice system. So I'm going to put up a slide that is not that great. You're going to have trouble seeing it, but it'll give you a little bit of a lay of the land, and I'll talk you through it to, again, talk through the chain of custody, so that when we talk about our bills, or when anybody talks to a bill for you and with you, you can place it better within the system. So let me see if I can do this. I think I can. Can everybody see that? Okay, great. So of course, as we know, the first part of the chain of custody, when somebody gets placed into the criminal justice system, is an interaction with the police. There are different levels of interactions with the police. There are encounters, which should be the shortest. There are stops, which might last a little bit longer and include a search. And then there is an arrest, a detention, at which point, and we can do know your rights with the police for you in the future if you so wish. We know that there are bills and proposals relating to all of those areas of police encounters. But then if you are arrested, then you are formally taken into the custody of the police. At that point, you may be put in a holding cell overnight before you go to before you go into the next set of chain of custody, which would be the courts. So while you're in the custody of the police, you may be in a holding cell at police headquarters overnight or over the weekend in some cases. And then you would then move into the court system, which is the first touch you would have with the court system is called an arraignment. It's the first standing in front of a judge that you will do. Hopefully you will have a criminal defense lawyer either assigned to you, or you will have been able to contact one to stand with you. There was a whole bunch of advocacy work that was done on this front around 2014 and 15 around a case called Harrell Herring, where it was found that New York State was egregiously violating rights because people were not having access to public defenders. And so the court case provided more resources for 5 counties in New York State. And then there was follow-up legislation that supposedly, still not done, caught up with providing resources for all the rest of the counties in New York State. So just to give you a sort of a snapshot of public defense is at that point when we're talking about arraignment, right? At arraignment also is when bail is determined, or if the charge that you're being charged with is what's called bail eligible. And so that also happens at the point of arraignment. It gets a little more complicated when we're talking about if you're brought in to the court system for a criminal charge, but also have some sort of ICE involvement in that. If you have a hold on you or an ICE hold popped on you, that becomes more complicated as far as what your lawyer should do and which of those things will be addressed first. But I will get to that a little bit more in the New York for All bill, because that can get very complicated. But at the point of arraignment, you can also bail can be set. It may be not an eligible charge, meaning that it's a low-level charge, that bail, that you don't need bail, and you can just what's called go home, remain on your own recognizance, released on your own recognizance, known as an ROR, which then you get to go home and wait for your trial date. Or also at that point, they might discuss a plea deal with you, which is not the point where they should be really discussing a plea deal, but the lawyers will start having those conversations at that point as well. When you come back, if you are released and you come back for your court date, if you have decided you are pleading not guilty, then you will go into the area of working with the attorney to set your defense. And that's where you've all heard this one about discovery, right? Discovery is when the lawyers are required to share information. The prosecution is required to share information with the defense about everything that they have on the defense, on the person who's being charged. And part of the reason I bring this up is because you are hearing a lot now about there was discovery reform that was mandating everything be handed over by the district attorney's office. And now the governor is looking at rolling back those advances as well. So that's the point where, as you're preparing for trial, where discovery comes in. The next piece is the reason we want plea deals to not be floated until all the discovery is met is because a defendant has the right to know what the state has against them before they will accept a plea, before they should be expected to even talk about a plea deal, right? You want to know, what are my chances here? But this area between arraignment and between trial and with the plea deal floated somewhere in there is a very gray area, because the threat of jail, even a short time while you're waiting for trial, and if you can't meet bail, if you did get bail set on you and you can't meet bail, all of those act as coercive powers against you to force you into a plea deal. So again, you're going to hear a lot of bills. We have a lot of bills out there that address almost everything that I just said. And they come up in all the bills. If you go to trial and then you are found to be guilty, then you go into the correction setting. You also can go into the correction setting while you're waiting for your trial, as I said. So I would turn it over to Elmer a little bit to talk about that end of the chain of custody before we go on to the bills.
Yeah, so thanks, Susan. The last piece is the criminal legal system, and people interchange justice and legal in different ways just because of how they perceive the system to operate. And what we have here is a criminal legal system that's supposed to bring justice for those impacted by a crime and those that commit a crime. I'm going to speak briefly on the corrections piece of this system. Once someone's placed in custody and they've been sentenced, they've gone to trial, they've been sentenced by a judge and a jury or a jury of their peers. They get sentenced to whatever the sentence looks like. It could be prison or it could be jail. So for the record, on Long Island, there are no prisons, but there are jails. Usually jails are short-term sentences, most of the time definitive or flat sentences, meaning that they have an end in sight, so like 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, whereas prisons, there are a lot of folks that have longer term sentences, often excessive sentences, due to the nature of their crime or just the crime in general and the nature of their case, or the popularity of their case. So people get sent to prison, and what happens from there is when they reach a certain point in their sentence, they can be considered for parole. Parole is a conditional release of an incarcerated individual before their sentence has been fully served. Now, that's sort of accurate, but not really accurate. The best way I paint this is that there are definitive sentences. So people that are serving flat bids, usually like I said, 1, 2, 3, or just maybe 10 years, and then they're out. Then there's a release date in sight. But there is a good chunk of the population that are serving indefinitive sentences, and those are sentences like 15 to life, 25 to life, virtual life without parole, which I believe is 75 or 50 to life. And what we're seeing with these sentences is that because of our past policy approaches to crime and policy, similar to the pretrial detention law, like the bail reform laws beforehand, the Rockefeller laws, we're talking about, the height of mass incarceration, heavy-handed sentences were passed down to Black and Brown and Latino members of our communities. And as a result, you have a system that incarcerates nearly 75% of those folks and keeps them locked up behind bars, despite the fact that they've shown that they're ready to rehabilitate and redeem themselves. So for those that are in that category of indefinitive sentences, they're set to languish behind bars up until the eventual time where once they reach the minimum years of their indefinitive sentence, they can then possibly be considered for a parole evaluation, which is usually done by a authority figure like the parole board, which is what we have in New York State. In New York State, the parole board is by law allows up to 19 commissioners. Right now, I believe there's only 16 commissioners on payroll, and the idea is that these commissioners sit in parole evaluations and determine the readiness of someone or suitability of someone to come home to serve the remainder of their sentence. And so what happens is they either are determined to be released on parole, or their parole date is delayed, or they get denied at the parole board, which is what we call a hit. When someone gets a hit at the parole board, they are set to wait 2 years before they can go and have their case reconsidered at the parole board. Part of the work that I do is around parole reform advocacy work, and it has to do with that segment of the parole system. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more down the line, but I do want to emphasize that a lot of people get denials. And the nature of their case and all the work that they've done since entering prison does not change from each denial. It's just arbitrary and often based on implicit biases rather than actual facts and data and science as to how someone will re-engage in crime. So if someone does get released on parole, they're assigned to a parole officer on the outside, and then they serve out the remainder of their sentence with their parole officer until they are officially released from parole. However, I do want to clarify 2 things about that. A lot of people that do go out on parole, there's a lot of things called you see on the chart something called parole violations. A lot of people do get caught up with parole violations because parole officers are actually set out to look for the red flags or the bad things that you're doing rather than focusing on the good things and focusing on reentry and things that they can do to support your well-being and reentry into society. So what we have is a system that also reincarcerates people after they've been released. And so that's parole violations. And there was a law recently that was passed called Less is More that addresses parole violations head on in ensuring that people have the opportunity to earn good time credits for all the good merits work that they've been doing to ensure that they do not get into trouble. They've reduced or removed a lot of these arbitrary violation rules violation notices where people can literally get sent back for maybe missing curfew or for drinking alcohol per se. So that's just something I wanted, and that was passed last session of last year. But I wanted to emphasize back to the corrections piece of this. Once someone's released from parole, the other piece that I wanted to mention is that the crime that they are convicted of perpetrating, it still follows them. It still follows them economically and socially in any of their in their day-to-day lives. And as it stands right now, there are no remedies of relief for expungement or sealing of these folks' records. It's very few and far for individuals, especially those convicted of violent offenses. So what you have is literally a society that bars people as second-class citizens for being involved in this criminal legal system. So the last piece to this, I think I said it already. If you have a flat bid, let's say you have 10 years, you get a release date and you're out and you get released. No further supervision is required unless you are classified as a sexual offender, which oftentimes comes with the sex offender registry and a slew of other sex offender specific stipulations. But that's pretty much all I have on correction, Susan. I don't know if I missed anything.
Can you just quick, no, I like that you told everybody the difference between jail and prison because everybody gets that mixed up. Can you just say something, just quick, the difference between probation and parole? I think that people also get that mixed up.
So the difference between probation and parole?
Yeah, like where, when did they happen?
While parole is for people who have been convicted of a crime and who have already served a portion of their prison sentence, probation is more of a community supervision option that does not require the convicted person to spend time in jail. So if you have been convicted of a crime and you've been sentenced to 2 years in prison, and there's no other remedy out of that, then you are more likely to be released on parole. Probation is when you are sentenced and the prosecutor and the judge might have some discretion saying, you know what, maybe it was a misdemeanor crime. The nature of your crime does not require you to go to jail or prison. Maybe they serve 30 days in jail and then they're on probation for 2 to 3 years. It really depends on the nature of the crime, the details, the severity, and what it is that the offense was. But those are two different things. So just to clarify, parole is really for those that are in prison that are going to serve the rest of their time under community supervision, whereas probation is kind of off the bat. At sentencing, they have an opportunity to come home with minimal time served and behind bars.
Great, thank you so much. I also just want to say that I am not an attorney and Elmer is not an attorney. If there are attorneys in the room, I'm sure you can get much more technical about the system. And we welcome any of your additions and comments to everybody's education when we, I guess when we open up for Q&A. So we always welcome that. So before I'm gonna go into 4 bills. One is on ICE. It's called New York for All. And before I put the PowerPoint up, I'm just gonna sort of lay the groundwork for what's been going on in Nassau and Suffolk counties around ICE and cooperation with ICE, to lay the groundwork for the need for this bill. A lot of times people, especially during the Trump administration, were very, very focused on the federal level activity around ICE, right? The people coming up from Mexico and all of Trump's rhetoric around all this, and then family separation, which is tragic. But everybody was very hyper focused on what was going on the Texas border, when in fact these decisions to cooperate with a federal agency are usually made at the local level. And so we need people to pay attention to what's going on at the local level. So very often I would talk to people who voted for Laura Curran, and I would explain to them that Laura Curran is cooperating with ICE in Nassau County. And they would say, no, she's not, she wouldn't do that. And the answer was, yes, she was, and she wouldn't stop. We asked her for all the years that she was in to stop cooperating with ICE. And so it's very important to look at the local law enforcement tie and what the county executive is authorizing their police department to do or not to do. In the case of ICE in Nassau County, there is an ICE trailer on the property of the Nassau County Jail. When somebody is released from jail, the sheriff's office can send a message out to the trailer and let the people in the ICE trailer know so-and-so is getting out in 10 minutes, you can pick them up outside the gate. The other thing that goes on in Nassau County is that the ICE agents will roam through the jail and will just randomly interview people and in some cases coerce them to sign things that will actually make them jeopardize their own right to a hearing, a deportation hearing. And so that's going on as well. There are no signs up in the Nassau County Jail. There may be signs up in the Suffolk County Jail, I'm not sure, in Spanish and in other languages, apprising people of their rights and saying, this is who these people are. You have a right to not talk to them. So there's a language barrier when they are approached. So they're intimidated, they're afraid, they don't know what's happening. So that is going on. The other thing that was going on in Nassau County was that ICE agents, and this was happening all over the place. ICE agents would wear shirts, jackets that sometimes would say ICE, that sometimes would say police only, that would not identify them as ICE agents. And so we were finding that communities, when ICE agents would go to somebody's house, the Nassau County Police, and I'm not as sure about it on the Suffolk side, but the Nassau County Police would accompany them to the neighborhood and help them secure the site. Commissioner Ryder assured us that he was not participating, and nor were his officers participating in the actual arrests and detentions, but they wanted to make sure everybody was safe. And so what we were trying to point out to Commissioner Ryder was that when your officers go and they are wearing Nassau County jackets and badges on their arms, the people in those neighborhoods are associating your police force with the federal agency of ICE, and that was undermining trust. And so if you want to be trusted, if you want witnesses to come forward, if you want people to feel safe calling the police for help, then you need to stop doing this. And they would not stop doing it. The other piece of this is that in New York State, there's a program called 287G, which actually puts local police officers through a training and deputizes them to literally carry out the duties of a federal agent. Now, we don't have that here in Nassau or Suffolk. There's one in New York State, it's in Rensselaer County. And the reason that we don't need it in Nassau or Suffolk is because the police are already cooperating with ICE. So they don't need to go through the training. They're already helping ICE find people and detain people. So we don't have it here, but when I get to the bill, it's one of the things that will be prohibited. And so there's a lot of that going on. The other thing that's happening is that jails actually enter into agreements and make money if they rent some beds out to the federal agency. So I think Suffolk had that going for a while. I don't know if they still do, but where they will make money being able to have ICE put people into that jail per, like a per bed. And so that was also going on. So I'm going to share my screen now and show you some of the particulars of what's called New York for All. Yeah, so this is the New York for All Act. And, we really tried for a very long time in Nassau and Suffolk to get both county executives to say, okay, we will instruct our police departments to not respond when ICE makes a request for them to hold somebody. There was a court case that helped a little, but they all found ways around it. The court case was called the Francis decision, and it literally said, you are not allowed to hold a body for ICE to come get them for more than 48 hours, which doesn't help anybody when the ICE trailer in Nassau is right on the grounds of the jail, and it doesn't take 48 hours to get anywhere in Nassau or even Suffolk. So they found plenty of ways, and there were other restrictions in the court case, but it still didn't do the job. And so because this is such a local issue, the New York for All Act is taking a statewide position and saying, we're gonna stop this from the state level and basically prohibit local law enforcement from cooperating with ICE. And the list is in the following ways. It prohibits the use of government resources for immigration enforcement. It restricts the disclosure of sensitive information to ICE or Customs and Border Patrol. Customs and Border Patrol, you'll find more along Buffalo, where they were boarding the buses and asking for papers, and that was the work of Customs and Border Patrol. So you'll find that more along right where there are real borders. It prohibits 287G agreements. It prohibits ICE from having access to non-public areas of government property without a judicial warrant. We're hoping that will stop the wandering through the jails and randomly interviewing people. And just to let you know, a judicial warrant, when we were doing Know Your Rights with immigrant communities during the time of Trump, when we were literally teaching people how to write up custodial papers for their children in case they didn't come home that night. It was very frightening. And so we were teaching people the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant. I'll get into the weeds a tiny bit here, but just so you become familiar with the lingo and why this is important. An administrative warrant is just a piece of paper from ICE. It's not backed by a judge having seen it or judged that there has been due process here. It is just a piece of paper from ICE, and it's the piece of paper that ICE was handing over to the police and saying, look, we have a warrant, and the police were honoring it. It wasn't a real warrant. It wasn't backed by due process or stamped by a judge. So this says you are not allowed into a non-public area of government property without a judicial warrant, which is constitutionally backed and is more of a guarantee that what we were promised by the Biden administration, and it's still not happening, that only people who are deemed to be dangerous, which is a whole nother can of worms, but having real charges against them will be given access, ICE will be given access to them. That's still not happening. But this judicial warrant is an important piece of that. It requires local jails to inform people of their rights when interacting with ICE, including their right to decline an interview and seek the assistance of counsel. And it contains clear reporting requirements and oversight of the Attorney General's office to make sure the rules are actually followed. By the way, any bill that comes in front of you, ask if there's a reporting component to it, because data collection and reporting is really super important. So this New York for All is, there's going to be a lobby day on, a virtual lobby day on April 21st. When I'm done, I'll drop that. I'll see if I can get the link to the chat in that one. Yeah, so this is really super important because people were very focused, again, like I said, people were very focused on what was going on at the border and wanted to talk about Trump, but you really need to talk about your county executives and you really need to pay attention to what your local government is doing. And families are still being separated still. And we don't expect anything better happening with Blakeman in Nassau County. So I just wanted to let you know about New York for All Act, and please implore you, we will be sending emails to you asking you to take action. We need this to pass this year. And just as a reminder, there are elections coming up and we don't know who's going to get elected and we don't know how much worse this is going to get for immigrant families. So this is the reason why we need this passed. And we really hope that you would, we hope that you're interested in this and get in touch with us. I'll also put my email in the chat when I'm done with this. The other three pieces that I want to talk to you about are part of the New York Full is also part of the Justice Roadmap, which is a huge list of pieces of legislation. One of the other pieces of the Justice Roadmap is called the Communities Not Cages campaign. And what this targets is it starts to address the beginning portion of at arraignment, and I'll tell you why, and then a little bit more through into the incarceration stage of the chain of custody. So the first bill of Communities Not Cages is called, is eliminating mandatory minimums. I don't know how many people are familiar, but the Rockefeller drug laws established mandatory minimums that were really unreasonable. During the Rockefeller drug years, people were getting stopped by the police, taken in, and were told they would be released if they gave the police 3 more names of people relating to drug laws. And so, what they were dangling were these huge sentences, 10 to 20 years is what was being dangled over people's head. So the threat of these mandatory minimum sentences is what actually acts on people when they're in the stage of being asked, do you want to take a plea deal? If you take a plea deal, that means that you're pleading to being guilty of a lesser charge, but you're still pleading to being guilty, which means that whole record is still going to follow you through housing, employment, education, all of those aspects of your life after you finish with the system. All of those things will still follow you. These mandatory minimums were creating more of a coercive power on people to take plea deals. And that's why we want to get rid of them. Because the amount of people who have taken plea deals, I think 90% of the people that get put into the system end up taking a plea deal. And that's just hideous. And this is one of the weapons that is used by prosecutors to get people to take plea deals. And so we want to get this taken out of the system. It removes the tool from the prosecutor's toolbox. It eliminates mandatory consecutive sentences. It removes persistent and what's called predicate felony sentences, which are the 2 and 3 strike laws. And it gives the convicted person the right to a hearing before they are incarcerated, where the court can take a look at mitigating factors, more than just the offense. And so that's the beginning of the Communities Not Cages. That's the eliminate mandatory minimums piece. The second piece of Communities Not Cages is called the Second Chance Act. And this is really goes along with the philosophy of, are we in a restorative and rehabilitative system, or are we in a punitive system? And if we're purely in a punitive system, I think that we're forgetting that people do things in their youth, that when they're 55 and 60 years old, they're a totally different person. And so the Second Chance Act is trying to change the culture of the system by saying, we're going to take another look at your sentence. So this act will allow people who have been sentenced to greater than 10 years a chance for resentencing. It also allows for people who have been sentenced for 10 to 19 years to apply for resentencing after serving half of their sentence. It creates a presumption of resentencing for those under the age of 25 at the time that they committed an offense, and for those over the age of 55. And it also mandates that a judge other than the sentencing judge does the review, which makes sense. And the third piece of Communities Not Cages is called the Earn Time Act. There are credits that you can earn while you are in prison through programs, education, mentoring, peer mentoring. All of those things are linked to and can be linked to what's called earned time credits and good time credit and merit time credits. Good time credits and merit time credits. A while back, New York State started to roll back people's opportunities to earn these and started to roll back access to being able to earn them. The other problem that happens is that there is a lot of power on the part of corrections officers inside any prison or jail. And so corrections officers were actually able to, because of disciplinary measures, take these credits away from people after they had been earned, which is heartbreaking. And so what this would do is it allows incarcerated people to earn good time credits to reduce their terms by 50%. And it allows incarcerated people to earn merit time credits, which can reduce their terms by up to 25%. It is consistent with other states, including Alabama, and it means that the credits get vested each year and they cannot be lost or taken away. And so that is Communities Not Cages. I'm going to turn it over to Elmer now for the RAP bills.
Sure. So, howdy, folks. Like I said, my name is Elmer. I'm with RAP, which is Release Aging People in Prison campaign. We're currently leading the People's Campaign for Parole Justice and also a campaign for clemency, the whole Go Bring Them Home campaign. The work that we do as part of the People's Campaign for Parole Justice is focused on promoting fair and meaningful release opportunities for incarcerated individuals in New York State prisons. The primary goals that we set out to accomplish are decarcerating New York State and reunifying families or incarcerated individuals with their families and loved ones. And the reality is that, like, part of what we do is based on the reality that thousands of New Yorkers are serving brutally long prison terms as a result of our state's kind of draconian sentencing laws rooted in implicit bias, in unfair parole release mechanism that is designed to punish, as like Susan said, is designed to punish and resentence rather than acknowledge change and transformation in people's behaviors, especially as they age. In response to these realities, we advocate for the passage of two key pieces of legislation that we think will undo these decades of harsh policies, of sentencing policies and approaches to crime. And one of them is the Elder Parole Bill, and the second one is the Fair and Timely Parole Bill. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we advocate for these initiatives because we value the worth and dignity of all people. We don't believe that anyone is disposable, or nor should anyone be defined by the worst thing that they've ever done. We do believe that, regardless of the harm that someone has caused, no one should die in a prison. We do believe that people should be held accountable but that accountability should be rooted in the fundamentals of redemption and transforming people to be a better person than they were the day before. And we recognize that prison sentences do not allow for meaningful opportunities for release, and neither does the parole supervision process for those that do have the opportunity to be released. So as part of the elder parole bill, elder parole would allow incarcerated people over 55 years of age and older who have served 15 consecutive years in prison the opportunity to go before the parole board for a hearing. This does not grant automatic release or presumptuous release. It is a meaningful review and evaluation opportunity for that individual who otherwise would languish in the state prison system. There are roughly 9,000 New Yorkers serving life sentences, and our state ranks among the harshest in the nation, surpassing states like Texas, North Carolina, and Georgia. And we're spending so much money on keeping these aging folks in prison, despite the fact that the recidivism rate for these folks is less than 1% for 55 years of age and older, and then virtually zero, 65 years of age and older. So the elder parole bill would ensure that people that have no reason to languish behind bars, people that have already, atoned for their crime, their harm that they've done everything they need to do to redeem themselves and rehabilitate themselves so that they could safely re-enter society again, have an opportunity to come home. So that's the elder parole bill. The fair and timely parole bill goes hand in hand with that of the elder parole bill, in the sense that right now, anyone who goes before the parole board, when they are evaluated, when they go before the parole board for their hearing or evaluation, oftentimes there is a sheet of paper here that is their accomplishments and everything. They'll be like, well, we saw that you got your master's and your bachelor's while you were in prison. We saw that you were a volunteer at the with the chaplain at the church. We saw that you were working while you were incarcerated. You engaged in corrective or behavioral correction programs, etc. But then they would always go back to the one thing that they cannot change, and that was the nature of the crime of conviction. And one would argue, well, why shouldn't they go back to the crime of conviction? The whole point is that they went into prison because they committed a crime. And I would push back in that fold in two ways. One, not every single person that lands in a prison cell is actually guilty of the crime that they committed. A lot of our system, and like Susan broke it down at the beginning, there's a lot of mechanisms that could easily fail just based on implicit bias and racism alone. And that's how you end up with a 75% of the state prison system being Black, brown, and Latino. That there's just no other way you can make that number up. So that's one piece to it. The second piece to it is that when people do go in, when people do have that evaluation, the whole point of the parole board is to determine if you are ready to come home. If they're withholding any mitigating safety concerns or flight risks, this person is ready to come home, they should be released to come home. And there should be a plan around their reentry. But the parole board does not do that in its current state. What the parole board does is relitigate the nature of the crime at conviction, which was already discussed and pressed. The charges were pressed. It was discussed in a trial of a courtroom of peers or judges back at the beginning of the criminal legal system. The point of parole is not to relitigate the crime. So the fair and timely parole bill would center rehabilitation on the conditions of release, not on the original crime of conviction, which might have been decades ago. It creates a real and meaningful evaluation opportunity for those that are serving life sentences or who otherwise would die in prison. And it brings us back to the original intention of parole. A lot of times people don't realize that parole, before the pandemic, parole numbers, release numbers were trending in the right direction, meaning people were actually getting released out of prisons now that number has drastically gone down. This upward trend reversed during the peak of the pandemic, and the parole board is now reviewing fewer cases and releasing fewer people when they should be actually accelerating de-incarceration in the interest of health and safety. And the best analogy that I use for this is that most people don't realize that prisons are essentially nursing homes. And if you're outraged at the way that the state handled the nursing home crisis, then you should be equally outraged that there is that crisis brewing behind bars. Those lives are not less valuable than senior citizens on the outside. And that's something that we have to reckon with, because society teaches us to believe that once you go through the criminal legal system, you are disposable. You have no value. And that is not true. That is farther from the truth. One thing that's on this slide that I didn't mention is the fact that incarceration just recycles the trauma that people go through, and it ripples it throughout the entirety of that person's life, meaning their family, their loved ones. They have to go through the traumatic experience of having an incarcerated loved one and having to work with them to eventually come home, if not see them languish behind bars. The one thing I will add is that this bill does not remove parole board discretion. The parole board can still determine if this person is not safe to re-enter. They can take the crime of conviction into consideration, but the denial cannot just be on that alone. It has to be that, one, the crime per se, and then two, there's an actual reason as to why this person cannot be released. And that could be like they maybe assaulted a correctional officer a week before their parole board hearing. They had 3 violations in the last 2 months before their parole board hearing. They reoffended or recommitted a crime. So that's the nature of the Fair and Timely Parole Bill. It ensures that people are evaluated for their readiness for release and not allowing the parole board to relitigate the nature of the crime. And the last thing I'll end on that piece is that, as I mentioned earlier, the law allows up to 19 parole board commissioners. As of right now, many of those parole board commissioners, while there have been positive strides under the last Democratic administration towards getting more aligned parole board commissioners on the parole board, a good majority of them are former police officers, detectives, prosecutors, people that were at the beginning of the criminal legal system criminalizing these people, are the same ones coming back and relitigating the facts of their case at their parole board when all they're asking is an opportunity to come home when they're ready. So that is the elder parole and the Fair and Timely Parole Bill. I think that's all I have on the wrap end of things, Susan. I hope I was pretty comprehensive on that.
Yeah, I would just like to say that I'm going to drop a registration link in the chat. There is a Communities Not Cages Lobby Day in Albany on April 26th. Yes. So we would love for you to join us. I will drop that in the chat. And I'm also going to put my email in the chat. If you are interested in New York for All, there's a lobby day, a virtual lobby day for New York for All. So that's easier to make on April 21st. So I'll put all of that in the chat. Looks like I might need to get you a better link for that, which I will do.
In the chat for myself, for the RAP campaign, we put our canvassing and phone banking volunteering form in there in case folks are interested in doing door knocking for the Parole Justice campaign in Hempstead and Wyandanch. Our first event is this Saturday at 11. But if you can't attend, just sign up via the form and we'll reach out and see when you can join us for our next one. Aside from our similar to Susan and Communities Not Cages, our advocacy days are happening. We are going to Albany next week on Monday and Tuesday for bail and for parole, and then the following Monday on 4/4 we're doing Second Chance Month, and we're going to be going for another advocacy day that as well. We'll send the links to Joe and Sharon and Carly and Jill and have them forwarded to you all via email.
Great. Thank you. I know it's a lot of information, but it's important information. And if we have some time, we want to do some Q&A. And I just want to make an observation. that, I've participated in, Communities Not Cages and rallies and such, and that I've met a lot of people who have rehabilitated, who've been, have been released, and their story is always inspiring because something in their past happened, and they have, gone through the process that we ask them to go through, to rehabilitate, to get beyond their past. And when they finally come back to join their families and community, they're looking to serve. I think that needs to be emphasized, that these are valued members of the community, and that they're doing really good work, and they want to correct the system that has, in many cases, holds the members of our communities there for no reason other than, well, the system doesn't work as properly as it should. If I can just, simplify it in that way. So I have a quick question. This is sort of a, how much money does it cost to we can go the whole process, but basically just to hold somebody, with our elders in prison, how much a year does it cost to hold on to them? I emphasize that we're holding on to them because they could be on parole. So, Elmer, do you have an idea?
Yeah, so I think the numbers are that we spend $100,000 to $240,000 annually on keeping an incarcerated older person in prison. So that of all your tax dollars, instead of funding communities, instead of funding the social safety net, instead of funding resources for reentry, and essentially, keeping our nonprofits bankrupt, we are funding prisons, we are funding cages. And like Susan mentioned earlier, this is not unique to criminal justice. This is unique to anything. We are outraged by things that happen overseas or things that happen in other states, but then when we see it happening in our own backyards, we're kind of like, oh, well, it is what it is. We can't do much about it. When in reality, you have the majority of the power to change things here, more so than you do in another state or another region of the world. All your power is really in your community, and that's something that we talk with legislators about all the time, where it's like they're always like, where are the constituents? Like, Long Islanders just don't care about this. And today alone, I don't mean to steer this off into bail, but today alone, we saw a slew of Long Island lawmakers just come out in support of Governor Hochul's plan to mass incarcerate New York again. And that's what it is. We cannot lie, or we cannot, sugarcoat it. The Governor Hochul's plan right now is to roll back all criminal justice reform work that we've done to make sure that these bills that we're talking about never even see the day of light. And it's to ensure that people, Black and brown people, are incarcerated again at a staggering rates than what we have as of right now because of these reforms. So when it goes back to money, that's the thing we should be telling legislators every single time. If jails and police worked, then why are we bloating their budgets and crime is still at an all-time high per se, as they say it is, when in reality, New York City crime is at the lowest it's been in decades.
Right. Yeah, and we supposedly live in some of the safest counties, Nassau County in the nation, and they have $1 billion budget. There's a lot of things you can bring up there. So I'm going to open it up to everyone. If there's some questions people have about the bills, you can now unmute yourselves and, just raise your hand, so we know that you want to ask a question, and we'll go forward. See, there's one hand raised. Susan.
I put something in the chat about a place that I lived in with a woman who came from Jamaica. She was not a citizen, and she constantly kept getting these letters from Homeland Security. And Homeland Security, shortly after that, kept going up and down the block for hours. I don't know if they're trying to deport her or not. She came from Jamaica and she never took the citizen exam. If you see the whole thing in the chats.
Hard to say, Susan, without probably more context to her situation.
So are you saying that Homeland Security, how do you know it's Homeland Security?
She would throw the envelopes in the garbage and never shred them up. Everybody would see return addresses from Homeland Security all the time.
In her garbage, everybody would
In the garbage can, the outside envelope, constantly, she would never shred the outside envelope. It was like everybody would notice that she was getting letters from Homeland Security. And shortly after that, about 3 weeks later, suddenly this Homeland Security police going up and down the block for hours every day. And I don't know if they were trying to deport her back to Jamaica or what. So it was very scary to me.
Well, sure. I'm also not, I'm just curious about the description of Homeland Security vehicles, because that would be.
That's what it was. It was a Homeland Security car that said all over it, Homeland Security, just going up and down the block for hours, every single day. And I don't know if they were trying to deport her back to Jamaica or what.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to, I guess, know more about her case. Is she still there?
I don't know. I left the place.
Okay. I can't shed a lot of light on it because I don't know that much about it, but.
Okay.
All right, Susan, I don't know. Yeah, unfortunately, can't really help on that front.
I was just curious.
Well, it sounds like a little bit of a mystery. Thank you, Susan. So I got another question. How are the bills going so far? You know, where are we at with that?
The Communities Not Cages is in its first year. Those three are in their first year. So I don't have the exact number of co-sponsors. And New York for All is in its second or third year. And I think we have a nice number of co-sponsors on that. But you know what I can do? I can send you the list of targets for each of those bills. And also to let you know, I do a lot of lobbying in district. And so, Joe, I can be in touch with you and let you know when I need constituents for in-district visits, because we're just, Elmer and I are doing it all the time for all of these bills. So New York for All, we're feeling a real sense of urgency to get done because of the upcoming elections, because of the fear of escalation with all of this, and because New York for All has been around a little bit longer. Communities Not Cages, as you see, bail is sucking the air out of the room. And so we're hoping that maybe we can make some headway. We're laying the groundwork, familiarizing legislators on Communities Not Cages right now. So.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a great plan. You know, Sharon and Jill and Carly and I are always connected with different orgs. I know Elmer is. You know, we are in the same circles. So,
yeah.
And then,
I mean, I think if the two things I would say is that, again, pay attention to what your county executives are doing, and pay attention to, if you knock on doors for politicians and then you just let it go after they're in and don't watch how they're voting, then make a decision not to vote, not to knock on the doors again. But a lot of times people don't pay attention and they knock on doors for a politician, and then we tell them, yeah, but you know, they're cooperating with ICE, or they voted no on this bill that I would assume would be for, and they would say no, they would never do that. Well, yes, they do, and they did. So yeah, pay attention to what they're doing after you get them elected, and hold their feet to the fire and let them know you will vote accordingly, you know? So.
Yeah, always happy to hold our electeds accountable.
And we've known a few who have promised certain things and then exactly the opposite once they're in.
Right. So, and they do need us. So, you know, happy, you know, to have those meetings and have those discussions.
Great.
They are important to be had. And I've been on a few of those lobbying calls with our local electeds, and I could say we don't always, more often than not, we do not walk away happy. But
Yes.
you know, these are bills I think, like you said, most people would be in favor of. And this is not, you know, this is not something that I think it's out in the space, you know, this is about, you know, making sure the parole board has enough people, qualified people on it, so they can process the paroles in a timely manner, making sure individuals who have served their time and rehabilitated have a chance, you know, to get back into their families and communities. You know, and you know, I personally could say, yeah, I think I was horrified when I found out ICE was right there by the Nassau County Jail and the hospital. You know,
That was quite a trick that she pulled on that one. We said when she got in, she was being all sorts of hopeful and, you know, being all nice to the advocates. And then we said we want the trailer off the grounds of the Nassau County Jail. And she said, clever that she is, she said, okay, I'll put it on the grounds of the hospital instead, which is, I don't even know which is worse, right? That means that people are going to be afraid to go to the hospital. So
Right.
what are you talking about? And then when she capitulated and said, oh, you're right, it wasn't a good idea, we're supposed to say thank you for putting it back on the grounds of the jail. And that's when we knew what we were dealing with when it came to Laura Curran and ICE.
Mhm.
It was very clear. It was very clear after that.
Right.
Okay. All right. We get it. We understand. We understand where you're coming from. So everybody needs to let their elected officials know they will be supported in certain circumstances and they won't be supported in other circumstances. And we need them to step up and lead, not run away from PBA rhetoric and not run away from truths, you know, and stop running, literally two meanings of that word. You know, and we need them to lead and we need to let them know that we will reward them when they lead. And so, yeah, so that's where we're at.
And there is urgency, like you said. Governor Hochul is putting a lot of her, you know, her policy, if you want to call it that, into the budget. And for anyone who doesn't know, New York State's budget is not just a fiscal document. It's a document where policy can be put in by the governor and the legislature. And often that's what happens. And it's because it forces our electeds to vote for the budget with everything in it. And there may be things that shouldn't be in there, but if they don't vote for it, we don't get money for schools. We don't get money for hospitals, you know, the things that we need. So it's a bit of a hostage situation when you look at it that way. So it's really important, if you haven't, to take a look at the links that are in the chat. Take a look at the flyers that are in there. You know, call your senators, call your assembly members, tell them, like, you've got to support these bills. Don't support Hochul's policies that she's trying to put into the budget. The rollbacks and the bail reform, et cetera. These are just regressive, supremacist type policies. And so it's important now because the budget has to be voted on by April 1st. And that's 7 days away, basically. So, you know, if there's no more questions, I don't want to pontificate anymore. And I appreciate Susan and Elmer for being here tonight. And we will have this recording for everyone, and you can share it out, and we'll have updates and links in the follow-up email as well. So again, thank you, and you know, have a great night.
Good night.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
for being here.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.